Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about music and how to listen to music, how to understand music, how to study music. One of the things that people love most in the world is music, and the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said that without music, life would be a mistake, right? And what Tower Records is it says, right? No music, no life. I agree with that, and I bet most of you do too. But what we're going to look at is not just life and music as the fun part of life, but we're going to look at music as the meaningful part of life. Today I want to talk about three things. First, I want to talk about music as it fits inside culture. Second, music as it fits inside history. And third, how can we get inside music by using questions to understand what music is a lot more. Now, today we'll first talk about music as part of culture. That's to think of music in a specific place, and the place in this class is America, American culture. That's what we're looking at in this first section of this lecture today. The second section is to think about time and how music exists in the sweep of history. If we can look at those two things, we'll have a better idea about what music is, what it does to us, why it's so wonderful. We can understand music more deeply. We don't have to just react and say, I like this, I don't like this. Rather, we can think, okay, where's this music coming from? This music is coming from a place, it's coming from a time. And if we can understand the place and the time of music, we will be able to understand it much more deeply. So the first two parts of today's lecture are going to look at place, America, and time. That time will be very different, and the place will also be very specific too. We'll look at older music from the 1920s, and we'll look at music all the way up to recent music. And we'll try to position those pieces of music in a specific time and a specific place. The last part of today's lecture will be very short because we really need to do that as a practical weekly activity. And that's to look at the various parts of the inside of the music, the structure of the music. The structure of the music, the feelings, the sounds, the instruments, the length of the song, the way it's put together, the feeling of it, the emotion of it, the ideas of it. All of this is what we'll look at with the questions. And the questions seem really difficult at first, and they seem hard to answer. But we don't have to answer all of the questions, right? For one song, we like this part or this part better. One song has lots of emotion, one song has lots of energy, another song has cool lyrics, another one is funny, another one is deeply sad. We have very, very different important parts to all of the music, but we want to look at all of the parts of the music. If we're going to analyze music, we have to get inside it and see how it works, how music creates meaning and creates such deep and powerful meaning, right? We are moved by music, and we want to understand why that happens, how that happens, by going inside the songs themselves. We're going to look at music as a text book in some cases, but as a mirror of American culture in other cases, and also as an artistic form that shows us what kind of creativity, what kind of expression Americans of many different kinds have put into musical form. And music is a great way to understand culture, because culture includes so many different things that we're just unconscious of. But when we listen to music, we're always conscious of that. Now, the difference between listening to music on your iPod or your computer and studying music at university in this class is in some ways a really big difference. And I want that big difference to be clear before we get too far into the course. Now, what I want you to think of music in this course is as a text, as a textbook, as a reflection of culture that carries values. What we're going to look at in this class, Topics in American Culture, is the values and the beliefs, the thinking, the ideas, the feelings of Americans. And that's a difficult term to define. What is an American? We'll get to that as we go along. But to look, especially I think with music, to look at feelings, right? That's a really core part of why we love music, why people listen to music, why some people, probably some of you, are crazy for music. Because it has so many feelings and so many interesting emotions, and this is what we want to focus on. But we also want to contrast music as a cultural expression and music as a consumer product. And this is where it gets tricky in countries like America and Japan, because both America and Japan have a huge consumer culture. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we want to get away from music that is made to make money. And we want to look at music that is made to express one's creative impulse, one's artistic form, one's feeling about the world. Now, the difference, as you can see from this contrasting list, music as cultural expression is very individual. It's bottom up, right? It's from people up. We're going to be looking at folk music, for lack of a better word, but music that's made from people's life upwards. And also, most of the music that we're going to look at, but not all, is somewhat small scale. On the other side, you can see music as a consumer product is something else altogether, right? Music as a consumer product tends to reflect the values of companies and corporations as opposed to individual artists. Music created by big companies tends to be top-down. They have an idea that more sales are better. But this really goes against the idea of music as a cultural expression. If we look at music as culture, we're looking at artistic motivation, not commercial motivation. We're looking at music that's developed from an experience of life, from very high performance technique. And of course that can be very simple in terms of chords or very stripped down production, but it's still a very, very high technique, high level of technique. Commercial music, in contrast, tends to be developed through research of the company, right? Through the corporations' meetings and trying to decide what can fit high production values, right? So that's something that's very, very different. Another difference, I think, is that the music we'll look at in this class is music that is really originally conceived of as a live performance. Of course, we'll be listening to recordings because we have to. But for commercial music, really the recorded, repeatable sales of the music takes priority. And much of the music, the blues and the jazz and the gospel, is really best experienced in a live situation. Um, we want to also think that music as cultural expression involves music that is critical in some ways, right? Uh, Musicians for years and years are, of course, creating music that it's beautiful. But much of the music we'll look at in this class is music that is very critical about American values. Uh, we'll look at musicians who are creating music because they're angry, because things are not okay, because they have something to say about how things are. Commercial music tends to be a little more passive, a little more quiet, a little easier in some ways. It's more focused on being fun, and the music in this class that we'll look at is more exploring ideas or reflecting on the world. So I think that's not always 100% true, but to some degree we'll see those two different approaches to music as slightly different. Lastly, thinking of music as a cultural expression means looking at universal, timeless themes. We'll look at music that talks about life, love, death, passion, confusion, anger, at the system. All of these ideas that you find in poetry and literature, in novels, in films, we'll see that music is in some ways a very condensed type of literature. We'll look at the way language is used to express things and to express huge meanings, very, very complex meanings, and very, very subtle values. One of the problems with commercial music is it doesn't really get to those big themes. It doesn't really get to the meanings of life. And as we look at the music in this class, I want you to keep those ideas clear. If you can look at this handout, which is the Genealogy of American Musical Forms, this is my way of trying to put together all of the different kinds of American music. This is very tricky because categories just don't work as well as we want to. And the separation, for example, between blues and rock or blues and jazz is a false separation. Latin music, we'll listen to a little music created by Spanish-speaking people. It's jazz, and it's blues too, and it has electric guitar, so it's influenced by rock and roll. So if we take a look now at this form, we can see that the influence of America, we can see the history of American culture really by looking at where this music comes from. If you look at the bottom, you can see that there's tremendous influence from African musical roots, but also from European musical roots. That music in both cases tended to originally be very religious music in some ways. Of course, there's also a tradition of non-religious music, and we'll, of course, focus more on that type of music. We'll look at gospel music, which brings together pieces of African style, bits of European style, puts it together with some of the teachings from the Bible. But most of the music that we'll look at is what we'll call secular music, right? Non-religious music. As you look at the bottom of the sheet, you can see that there's many different traditions feeding into America. And from the early times, from the 1600s, there's all sorts of folk songs and work songs, street calls, protest songs. We see that there's influence from European folk music, from Ireland and Britain. There's music that came from Portugal, right? Portuguese were great sailors, and as they traveled around the world, they took their music with them. Spanish influence is there, especially we hear in the rhythms of jazz. What's called the Latin tinge is an element of almost all jazz. And as you look up just a little bit more, we'll get from the 1600s, 1700s up to the 1900s. We see that in the United States there's just a profusion of so many different kinds of music that it's really hard to even categorize all of them. Because America is such a big country, and also because people traveled, many different places had their own style of music, their own way of playing, their own way of dancing to the music, their own instruments that they had. And this complexity and variation, I think, is one of the unique parts of American music. And we'll look at that as we look at different styles, different ways of playing, different ways of putting instruments together. As you look up just a little bit more on the genealogy, genealogy, of course, means genes, like the body's genes, DNA, right? What gives rise to what gives rise to what. We see that everything is giving birth to something else. Muddy Waters has a great song called The Blues Had a Baby, and they called it rock and roll. But really, all of the music is kind of merging and reproducing and mating with other types of music. We can hear certain pure forms, but we also hear a lot of mixing of things together. And we'll look at that in more detail as we start to look at the music. The darkened sections here are the music that we're going to look at in this class. But you can see that there's a lot of music we're not going to look at, which is kind of sad. But we can't do everything, and we're going to have about 9 weeks of music, which is a lot of music. But I also want you to get a sense from this chart that we're leaving out a lot of music. And sad as that might be, we need to look at the most important kinds of music, the most influential styles of music. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now, I want to talk just really briefly, and we'll do this as more a practical part of the class, about how to listen to music. I said music on your iPod that you buy from iTunes is different from the kind of music we're going to listen to in this class. Our approach will be different. Now, I listen to music on the train every morning and every evening going back home, and I don't think about it all the time. I just put it on and say, oh, wow, that's nice. Oh, what's the state? Oh, am I home yet? But we need to do something more than that, right? We need to think, we need to analyze, we need to get into the music a little more. So if you can look at the handout, how to listen to music, what you can see is that we need to think and respond and find the meanings and the deeper meanings of the music. So I want you to consider this music not just as having a good time, which it is, but also as a real sense of discovery, of getting into the complex three-dimensional elements that music carries. We can think of music as BGM, background music, but that's not what we're going to do in this class. We're going to really dig in and pull it apart, look inside, see how the music expresses its ideas and its emotions. So the questions that I have outlined for you on these sheets are something that you'll use almost every week. So I want you to be sure to bring that with you, and be sure to use these questions on a weekly basis. So let me just go over the major parts here. First, description. We're looking at two sides, right? One is the music, one is the lyrics. And the way of using these questions, I think, is pretty straightforward. You may have to look up some words here, but I want you to get a sense of how the questions are leading you into, are moving you into the music more deeply. So those first questions is part of the description, a part of paying attention. The second group of questions is about analysis, and this means thinking a little bit more, thinking a little bit more deeply about the music. Third section is interpretation, right? Finding the meanings of it. How does this music create meaning and express meaning? Background, I'm going to give you some of that, and some of it you can find on the internet very, very easily. But that's kind of information around the music. When was it made? Where was it made? What kind of people listened to this? That's part of the background. And the last part, of course, is judgment. Judgment means, is it good or is it bad? But I want you to not think of the music as good or bad at first. Duke Ellington famously said there's only two types of music, good and bad. But let's leave that aside, the judgment, because we want to really understand the music before we start to think, is it good or is it bad? That's all for today. Have fun listening.